Policy. So please come back to your seats and we would start the session. Professor Miltos Ledikas is here with us. He has been leading several projects with the European Commission and at European Parliament across for last several years and has worked very closely with the research community in several different developing countries, and also in form of how we look at the dimension of technology assessment, not only for countries within Europe, but also South Africa, China, India, Brazil, and has a great experience in terms of working at ITAS, Germany, which is Institute of Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis. He holds a research fellow position at the University of Central Lancashire, and he had also held research positions at the London School of Economics and the Science Museum in the UK, as well as the European Academy in Germany. His research background covers the areas of technology assessment, public perceptions of science and technology, ethics, and S&T policy and science development. This issue is of extreme significance for countries like India, as briefly emerged in our session this morning. Mr. Jairam Ramesh, who was there, was the minister when India decided a moratorium on genetically modified crops. And for that, he is viewed by different people from different lenses. Those who are in favor of biotechnology, you can imagine, condemn him, attack him. Those who are in favor of organics and other kind of agriculture production, they love him. So that is the spectrum. In South Korea and in a couple of other Asian countries, the commercialization of things like washing machines, etc., which have nanoparticles in them, it has become a huge debate on how you regulate. So science technology assessment for countries like us is extremely important, and it is important in terms of how it brings in the developmental choices, but also how it provides policy space to government to maneuver around and make possible choices available for people to move forward with. So without further ado, I would like to now invite my dear friend, Professor Miltos Ledikas, for his talk to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zachin. Always a pleasure to be here. We have quite a long time collaboration with RIS. We have done a lot of interesting work together, and I'm very pleased I was invited to talk about the work that we are doing in Germany, but also I will refer to some of the work that we have done, which I think it's very interesting for the people here. So, we talked about the politicization of science. Me first, trade second, and then what we are here to talk about. Obviously, it's a very bad idea to politicize science. It can only lead to the wrong decisions. We know that, but we do not know how to undo the politicization of science, as it is a complex issue. Science anymore is out there in the public domain, and it involves publics, interested publics, it involves NGOs, it involves scientists themselves, and it involves politicians. So what I'm here to talk about, you can see it as a way to apoliticize science, or at least to tell you what we do in Europe, and a way of giving science policy advice that can be done in the most objective and useful way for policy making, so that we can apoliticize and keep as much as possible ideologies out of scientific decision making. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about actually us in Germany, because we are a very particular institute in the German science system. But my main, the bulk of my presentation is going to be on technology assessments, about the functions of technology assessment, a little bit of history, which is interesting in itself, the typology that we have in technology assessment, and the methodologies that we follow. And then we go to the global aspect of technology assessment, something that for us is very topical, very important, and we're actively working on, where I'm going to give some examples of the work we have done, including work that we have done with our dear colleagues here in RIS, but also give some thoughts about the challenges that we are faced. So a little bit about ITAS, that's the Institute of Technology Assessment and System Analysis. That's our building. It's a nice building in the center of Karlsruhe in southwest Germany. ITAS was founded in 1995. It's a research facility, it's the biggest research facility of the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. It by itself is one of the biggest and excellence university in Germany, about 25,000 students. ITAS itself is the largest, oldest scientific institution in Germany dealing with technology assessment and system analysis. So, and being the largest in Germany is, as a matter of fact, the largest in the world that does technology assessment, because technology assessment is very specific in Germany. We're about 110 scientific staff that they do technology assessment, and for us, very important. We're a mix of natural scientists and engineers, but also social scientists and humanities experts. And there is always a great number of projects that run. At the moment, there are about 50 projects, so we're keeping very busy. But what we do is actually part of the research program of the Helmholtz Association, which is called Technology Innovation Society. Helmholtz Association is the biggest research funder in Germany. And basically, this program, Technology Innovation Society, is us. Let's say 90% of this program is us. It's a small program, as Helmholtz is a 5 billion euro budget a year, so we have a very small part in that. But we're also the only ones who do this kind of work, and we do it autonomously. We also have, of course, third-party funded projects. A lot of our work is third-party. But we are very special about who we get, let's say, funds from. And mainly it's the German Parliament, the European Parliaments, the European Commission, and also federal and state ministries in Germany. Industry association does happen, but not a lot, actually, as we're quite particular also about the way we work. And there is also, of course, some teaching being done, but this is a small part, actually, of what we do. We're a research institutes, mainly. So we have 4 main areas of working: sustainability and environment. Actually, we are very active in the sustainability debate in Germany. Germany being very active in the world, as you know very well. We are a kind of leading there in the policy advice area. But my area is the next one, the innovation processes and impacts of technology, where I'm going to talk a little bit about. We also have the knowledge society and the energy. Energy also being a very key area in Germany. That, as you might know, Germany is moving now to ban nuclear energy and move to alternative and sustainable energy resources. So it's a very big experiment and undertaking that's happening right now in Germany. So we are very much part of it. So what we do is to provide the research-based advice for ministries, authorities, and parliaments. We have, actually, we run the Office of Technology Assessment of the German Bundestag, that's the German parliament, which soon after its foundation, it has outsourced the policy advisory work, and we do that for the parliament. So there is a direct relationship there with the parliamentary debates and our work. But we also work at the European level. We have a group which is called the European Technology Assessment Group that we also coordinate. in order to advise the European Parliament. The European Parliament has its own parliamentary office, the Scientific Technological Options Assessment, and it's also outsourcing its work to us, basically. So we're very much part of, let's say, of the debates that are happening at the parliaments. Where do we belong into the overall system? So this is the German Research and Innovation System. It's a graphical representation, at least what the ministry tried to come up with. There are a lot of arrows there, interconnected arrows. So it's a federal system in Germany. So there is a federal government, but they also have 16 state governments that have their own ministries. So they both collaborate, but they also work independently as well. So they might have the same approach, but also a different approach in various different debates as well. But in any case, they both the federal and the state governments, they work with the public research institutes. That's where the funding goes directly to universities, academies, federal institutions, and research organizations like the Helmholtz Association, the HGF that you see there. This is our organization, which is also the biggest research organization, as I told you, but also very famous ones like the Max Planck, the Fraunhofer, or the Leibniz Research Association. They, at the same time, they work with intermediaries, or the German research center, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. You might have heard of that. Maybe some of you have worked with them because they do also work outside of Germany. Foundations, but also industrial research. And all that fits into industry, but industry also fits directly. There is a kind of exchange between collaborations between these industrial research centers, the public research institutes, and the industrial innovation. But we're not really part of that because we cannot be part of this system. We have to be outside the system. So we're there, which is the consultation bit. We are funded directly by the government or via the Public Research Institute, but we're completely autonomous. And this is also quite important, and we fall within that consultation basically area, which is also involves other groups which are directly funded by the government, like the Commission of Experts for Research and Innovation, the ITEC Forum, which is also a very important forum in Germany, and the Innovation Dialogue, which is also a dialogue that involves a wide representation of the German society, both research and non-research based dialogue. And we also work directly with the European Commission. Actually, a lot of work that I personally do has a direct relationship with the European Commission or the European Parliament. So now to technology assessment. What is technology assessment? Well, there is something obvious about it. You assess technology, but how? I will give you the old definition of technology assessment. So TA from now on is a class of policy studies which systematically examine the effects on society that may occur when a technology is introduced, extended, or modified. So in the older times, when TA started, and more of that in a while, TA was a straightforward scientific endeavor with a policy relevance. So it was a policy study on science and technology, and it was specifically focused only on science and technology and nothing but science and technology. Now, as you will see later on, that has moved a lot through the ages, and it has become a little bit more up-to-date, more inclusive, and that has brought us also to a new definition that we came up with. Actually, it was a project that I did with colleagues from the European Commission. And this project came up with a more modern and more apparent and more innovation, science, technology, innovation needs TA. So TA is a scientific, interactive, and communicative process which aims to contribute to the formation of public and political opinion on societal aspects of science and technology. So you see immediately the difference. We have now interaction in what we do. But we also have communication. Now, interaction, we'll talk about what kind of interaction, but we have communication. So now we communicate also about what we do. Like scientists have to communicate, we are a scientific endeavor in a way, so we have to communicate about our work directly and not through intermediaries. But also, we're not only working on the political opinion making, which is basically, of course, our main, let's say, client, our main aim. We also work at the public opinion, because scientific debates are public debates. So we have to work in both aspects of the scientific debate. And as before, but we also look at the consequences of science and technology innovation in the society. So we look at the societal aspects of it. By the way, yeah, this is all into a book that I will also ask our RIS colleagues to provide you with. That's the result of a project we did, as I just told you before, with all the TA institutes in Europe. So we try to standardize the TA methodologies and impact assessment in Europe, something which is very important for us, and something that will help us to move on at a global level. So a brief history of TA. We did have TA activities ever since we had the modern science. Some people argue ever since we had science. So there have always been some kind of assessment. It has to be. If you have a scientific development, you must have a kind of assessment of this development. We had it in government ministries since the 50s already. We had it in research institutes, universities, but we had no official institute, nobody who was doing actually technology assessment, nothing but technology assessment. This came in 1972 with the founding of the US Congress's Office of Technology Assessment, as it's appropriately named. The main focus of this office was the early warning system and policy options. So it was a kind of risk-based assessment of science and technology, and with the aim of providing options to politicians, to the US Congress in this case. One might say that that was the father of, or the mother of TA institutes around the world, and yeah, I'm afraid to say that the father or the mother have died a long time ago. The institute was abolished, actually, but it continued, it's all continued, reincarnated into European TA, where soon, actually, after the Office of Technology Assessment, as we also had science-related debates, we basically had the same debates in Europe. Like in the US, there was the nuclear the debate, for instance. There was a big nuclear power debate, a big debate in the 60s also in Germany. So our first proposal for a parliamentary TA came in 1973, very soon after and following the OTA example. But it took quite some time, as it usually does, actually, I have to say, in Europe. So the first office was created in France, not in Germany, a decade after that. So you see more or less the main offices of Parliamentary Office of Technology Assessment in Europe and their establishment year. So the French one in 1983, still very active, by the way. And the rest came towards the end of 80s, like the German one that we run, as I explained. So, how is the overall TA landscape in Europe? It was some time ago, actually, that people start measuring, actually counting the TA institutes that they do TA, or groups that they only do TA and nothing but TA. And you can see here that is basically a German undertaking. And if you take it as a proportion in terms of population, number of inhabitants and the number of TA institutes, it's mainly a German-speaking undertaking, as Austria and Switzerland have a lot of TA institutes as well. So UK and the Netherlands as well, of course, are very big, but they're also bigger countries, UK, that is. So it is a German thing, and I think there is a reason for that we'll discuss later on, but it's not only a German thing, TA. We can find it in many countries in Europe. Actually, every country in Europe will have some type of TA. But the biggest countries, the more S&T intensive countries will also have, of course, more TA institutes. So, in terms of TA, what type of TA we have nowadays? If one had to categorize it, the most obvious one, it's the TA that, as in the beginning, as it started, as a policy advice and nothing but policy advice. So you have the parliamentary TA that happens at parliaments in Europe and only in Europe, as far as I'm concerned, but also the departments of science and technology. We also have TA departments there. In Germany, we had also one, still have with a different name. But there's also TA in the public debate. So we do the TA in terms of the public debate in science and technology, because this is also an important aspect of the policy debate, is an important aspect of the decision-making debate, and we try to be as objective as possible in bringing in public and perceptions and public debates into the policy debate. And we have also very standardized process of TA, and that's TA in the engineering process. So engineers, it's very important for them to have a proper technology assessment, also an inclusive technology assessment. So the VDI, that's the German Association of Engineers, they have their own technology assessment department for their engineering infrastructure projects, which are quite big, as you can imagine, in this country. In terms of methodology, one can see it as a continuum of methodologies of what we use in a TA. So what is called the classical TA is how TA started and is still functioning up to a point, is the expert-oriented TA. It focuses on risks. It's what OTA did and what most TA in Europe did when they were first established. So it's a kind of risk assessment exercise, a scientific risk assessment exercise in terms of consequences of the specific technology on health, environment, and economy as well. The major focus of classical TA is to rationalize the debate. So basically to keep a rational, to bring out in the policy a rational argument, yeah, so to apoliticize the policy debate, as we said before, but also to give a feeling of threat diffusion. So that's to give really a good assessment of what actually threats are we talking about in the specific area that needs assessment. When it comes to the public, that was a one-way relationship and still is in this type of TA. So basically it's experts that they will provide the public with knowledge and information as and when the public needs. That's a one-way movement of knowledge. We still have examples, actually, what a lot of the TA that we do, because also for engineers, it's also specific ones for government, is this type of TA, actually in Germany. But we have what we call participatory TA. That's a development that happened in Europe, with roots in the United States, by the way, but still, it really flourished in Europe. That's a non-expert TA. So we do include the public in what we do. So the public becomes a stakeholder as important and as powerful as the experts in this process. For that reason, we also focus on values, because everything comes with values. People say science comes with values. I agree, although I want to believe that they're not so strong values as a lot of values that we hear around. But the public definitely comes with values, ideologies, religious beliefs, and so on and so forth. So these values have to be part of the assessment of the technology. So in that sense, we attempt to create a coherent debate. It's not simply about risks, it's about what technology is perceived to be as, everything around this technology. We have a variety of experimental models there. They're still experimental because although it has been applied for the last 20 years, we're still learning in terms of participatory TA, and a lot of our Nordic colleagues in the Netherlands, but also in Finland, in Norway, Denmark, they actually specialize in this type of TA. In terms of methodologies, there are many methodologies actually to choose from, many established social scientific methodologies, and not only. For instance, we have, when it comes to scientific methods, we have an expert discussion. That's, of course, by far the most important. If you want to have a scientific discussion, you want to have a scientific method, we need experts to discuss and exchange information and opinions about that. So sometimes we use Delphi methods, these are online, opinion leader methods. We use also modeling and simulation in our work. But when it comes to interactive, then we have certain methodologies that we use, like consensus conference, citizen service, scenario workshops. I will not tell you details, but these are all methodologies that they work with the stakeholders, either informed stakeholders, like a specialized NGO, but also the public at large. And we also have communication, of course, so there we do some standard, some not so standard communication methodology. We use, of course, newsletters. We were also keen to have actually a dissemination in the press, in the media as well. But there are also very new art-based experimental methods there in terms of communication that some of our colleagues, at least, are doing. But whatever we do, we need quality. Quality is very important because quality is what makes us different than anyone else. Let's say quality is what will bring a good debate and a good decision making. So when it comes to scientific quality, we absolutely need interdisciplinarity in it. No single discipline can provide the answers to a scientific question. You don't invite only biotechnologists to answer a biotechnology question. That would be wrong, actually, because it does not refer only to biotechnology development. It's a trade issue, as we know very well. It is a risk issue which goes beyond, actually, the risk assessment standards that we have. It's a public issue. Actually, it's a religious issue as well. So we need to have interdisciplinarity in that, and we need to have experts in it. So for that, we need scientific reliability. So for us, it's very important that the people who are involved, they're very reliable scientists in their area of work. In terms of interactive quality, when we go out, we talk with other people, we have to also appear to be fair, so both socially fair. Every group that wants to be part should be able to be part. Also, the process has to appear to be fair and appear to be fair as well to everyone involved. Not that they are there simply to to pay some kind of lip service to a process that will not take their opinion into consideration. They have to be also in the process fairness. So that's why we have to be transparent in our words, but also at the same time we have to be argumentative to have quality in the argumentation. So we need the quality. We cannot simply have Twitter type of debates in what we do. We need a good argumentation. In terms of communication quality, we need also to be able to communicate with the people that are important actually in our work. So therefore we have to be flexible and adaptable. We also use social media, although we don't do TA via Twitter, we use it also to communicate. But whatever we do, it has to be also a relationship to the political reality. So it has to be embedded into policy. So we never forget that whatever we do must have a policy relevance. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been to be diffused. So we try to diffuse our results as widely as possible. So all our reports, with a very, very rare exceptions, are public, for instance. If one wants to do TA, if one wants also to adapt TA into different climates and situations, one needs to look at what factors are important. We looked at that as well in that with our colleagues in that also book. You will find details there if you want to read. I'll go very fast to that. What we think they're the most important influencing factors in the establishment and running of TA. One is the institutional setting, which I will tell you more about that, whether it's a policy, directly policy embedded or not, whether it's a parliamentary or non-parliamentary, what type of process is allowed to have, whether it's reactive or proactive, but also the institutional image that is quite important in this process. But very important also when you want to export, if you like, TA, and we had to export it in Europe, because we shouldn't forget that Europe is not one entity. It's 27 countries, and they have very different cultures, public debates, and so on and so forth. So we need to look at aspects of the policy-making culture which are influential in TA. One of them is, we call it organized interest, but actually it's any kind of lobbying activity you can imagine. They work very differently in the different countries. One has to take this into account, actually. We work also against other groups which might not be so let's say, objective, as we'd like to believe ourselves, but they also have influence in the policy making in science and technology. So we need to be aware of these groups, and these groups are very important for us, this organized interest. But also what kind of level of social debate we have, what type of awareness we have of science and technology issues, which technology issues, and knowledge about these issues. These are all very important aspects that influence the TA we do. And the most important of all, especially if you want to move it to a non-Western cultures, cultural differences. I will come back to that later on. So a few words. The parliamentary setting is, as it says, but it should be emphasized that it's strictly adhering to the needs of the parliament. If I worked for the parliamentary office, I wouldn't be able to be here. Or maybe I would be able to be here to give a talk, but I wouldn't be able to be here as a member of the project group that I was 2 days ago, because we're not allowed to work in anything but parliamentary work and parliamentary reporting. There is a more general role in promoting public debates and act as a bridge builder. This happens in some parliamentary office, like the Swiss parliamentary office or the Netherlands, the Dutch one. They do actually ask them to go out in the public and to interact with the public, but basically on also parliamentary issues and parliamentary policy debates. But in any case, the main audience is the policy-making community. Because of that structure, of course, there is also more relative financial stability. You saw there were like 250 TA institutes. We don't know actually the exact number because they come and go, more or less, but not the parliamentary ones. They're usually there to stay because they are very well embedded. In the non-parliamentary setting, you have, of course, more independent institutional arrangements. It happens in a university, it happens even in industry, in an engineering association, and so on and so forth. We don't have also specific target audience. Anyone could be a client. Anyone could be the expert audience to it. Any public can be public to this process. There is, of course, a lot of flexibility and self-determination, anything from the timing to the presentation of the study, but also very great vulnerability, budgetary costs. So if you have a project, you have a TA institute. If you don't, you don't. We also have what we call a reactive setting. It is, but not always, a kind of parliamentary setting. So it depends on the external factors. You know, it depends on your client. It depends on the one who is asking you to do that, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the ministry, whether it's the local government, or even industry in some cases. So everything is every work you do is request-led. Like in our case, by the parliamentary committee, there is a committee on technology assessment actually, who requests our work. Of course, there is little flexibility in what you do, but there is high policy relevance as well, because there is a one-to-one relationship there. In the proactive, the institute will decide, of course, what the study. It will decide also the length of the study, and there is a high determination, but also uncertain policy presentation. My institute, ITEC, is actually a mixture of both, I would say, because we also run these parliamentary offices, but we also have a lot of flexibility outside the government to do our own thing. So we are allowed to have flexibility, and we use it accordingly. In terms of institutional image, if one tries to provide a kind of this kind of methodological and therefore an image of the institute, of how it works, what kind of TA it does, from the participatory to the classical one, you see this kind of grouping. So we have the Nordic, as I said before, doing more participatory work. We are somewhere in the middle, and actually we do both in Germany at the European Parliament, which is also very, very similar for obvious reasons, but there are also countries who do straightforward what we call classical TA, risk assessment type of TA. But we're also in the middle between these three aspects that also the gentleman talked about before, between politics, science, and the public sphere. So we always try to balance these three aspects. And if one had to give a kind of another institutional image on how different countries, what type of let's say, balance they have, these are also the groupings that we came up with. So You can see again that we in Germany were more like on the scientific, let's say, we are more pulled towards the scientific aspects of the work and not the public sphere of the work and not the political aspects of the work. I was talking with our Indian friends who have tried actually to set up a parliamentary office here, and it might succeed one day. And I was thinking whether India could fit in this kind of structure. And it seems to me it's quite politics related and politicized as well. Maybe you have seen it also from the previous talk situation here, and I think it's the same for TA as well. You would have to be really very, very closely attached to the parliaments and the way that politics are done in the country, but more of that later on. So the roles of TA. So what are we there for, after all? You do this classical, we do the participatory, we have the different methodologies that we can use. If one tries to explain the European TA, because that's what we try to do, a TA that happens in 27 different countries, we come up with very different, let's say, roles that TA come. And you can see here. Let's say, obviously, I will not go into any detail about that, but any interesting person can find these details, as I said before. Basically, there are two types of dimensions that you can see where the TA roles and functions are. You can see it on the vertical side, the issue dimension, so it's a technological or scientific aspect that TA works, obviously, I would say, but it's also a societal aspect, and it's a policy aspect. These are all obvious roles that TA plays. On the horizontal, it's the impact dimension. What type of impact TA aims to have? There's again a continuum, I would say. In this sense, there is raising knowledge. We try to raise knowledge, also directly to the politicians that they have to debate, also to expert community, but also to the public. And when it comes to that, we at the same time, we form attitudes and opinions, because we are influencing by the choice of the knowledge that we pass on, by the choice of the methodologies we do, we also form and influence the debate. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is to initialize actions, whether that's policy actions, scientific actions. We want to be to have impact, basically, in what we do. And the highest impact is the actual action that is taking place. Within that, there are different ways of doing it. As I say, you can see it as a continuum from the scientific assessment, the first box on the left, which is the most typical, classical, all type of TA, going through mediation. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is to have a decision taken basically on our work. So we have to have as much policy relevance as possible in any given situation. But nowadays, what we do is somewhere in between. It's there. It's about forming attitudes and opinions. So since TA overall in Europe, it is done more and more public. It's using more and more interactive methods. It is involving, and also even the politicians nowadays, they expect to involve public, to involve interested publics, to also work as a mediator, to work as a bridge builder. So this is what we do. So our impact in that sense is more to restructure the policy debate rather than to write legislation, so to speak. This is not our role in any case. So we try to look at the debate, see where the faults in the debate are, and if possible, correct, if you like, these faults, and restructure the debate in an improved way. So the key aspects of TA still focuses on societal acceptance and sustainability. It's important, especially nowadays, sustainability is in everything we do. We need to involve in our TA work, but sustainability doesn't mean only environmental sustainability, by the way. It's also societal sustainability. We want to have applications of TA and advice that will be there in the long term. We are based, of course, on interactive mode of assessment that is clear, as I said before. Again, we promote public debate. Sometimes we instigate public debates. Our colleagues, especially in the Netherlands, they're even specialized in instigating public debates. They come up, they start the public debate on synthetic biology, for instance, in the country. And they have been very successful in that. But we also function as bridge builder amongst the stakeholders. It is a natural function that we have and it becomes more and more professional, I think. But whatever we do, we still aim at policy input. Whichever methodology, whichever way, it still has to be policy relevant. So, where do we stand and where do we go from here? TA is active, particularly, as I said, in Germany, German-speaking countries, but in any case, it has an increasing role in science debates. We are asked to be involved in almost anything that happens around science and technology, and nowadays almost everything is science and technology. You know, have the ICT, we have now the algorithm discussion with the social media, we have the new gene editing possibilities. Everything that happens will come back to us, and there is always an increasing role that TA has to play. But in order to do that, we need also higher interdisciplinarity, and we have to be more applicable in our interdisciplinarity. It's not an easy task to do, actually. It's very difficult, in my opinion. That's why it is a long-term process. It's not easy to make people from different disciplines understand each other. We still have to work on the impact assessment, like many, if some of you are social scientists, you know very well that when it comes to impact assessment of social science, we're not very good there, I would say. We're not good at assessing the impact because the impact is diffusing, you know, it's everywhere. So we need also to do some work there for our own impact. It will help us and it will help our work, but also what we try to do in society. But in any case, we do have a clear role in what is called nowadays responsible innovation. The European Union is very big on this idea of responsible innovation. Now they start talking about open science, it's about this inclusive innovation. Innovation that is socially acceptable, socially desirable, sustainable, and so on and so forth. So for us, it's basically what we do, even if we don't name it like that. So we do have a clear role to play there as well. And in any case, there is a strong global perspective in what we do because there is a strong global perspective in anything that science and technology is about. So our wish and our activity nowadays, my activity also personally, is to move towards a global TA framework. I could give you a case study with that, but since I didn't check actually the time, let me see. Okay, I'm more or less at the time they asked me to finish, so we can have a little bit of interaction because I believe there was a change in program and there will be someone else giving a talk later on. So I will go fast through that because, again, you can read about that if you are interested, but a case study that we did also with our Indian colleagues, that's why I wanted to talk about it, and the Chinese colleagues was in ethics in science and technology. TA is also dealing with ethics, needless to say. It's not about TA, it's about a global approach in one of the TA's, let's say, ingredients, which is ethics, because we found it particularly interesting to do that, and because the European Union also had funds to do it. So it was us in Germany, our India colleagues, also the Ministry of Science in China, and the Parliamentary Office in the Netherlands, and my other institute in the UK. We basically looked, you can read it out, but basically look at the debates on ethics. We try to see how ethics is embedded in the science and technology policy. We need to find the social determinants of that. We need to find best practice systems to go on a global debate about that. In order to do that, we have to find a common framework for these three very different regions and cultures. So this is the important thing here. And we did that on nanotechnologies, food technologies, and synthetic biology as well. So we looked at those three technologies in these three regions. So if you are interested to know more about that details, there is a book, it's an open access book. Again, I will ask our RIS friends to provide you with that link. And actually, it turns out to be quite popular book, I realize, has already had 60,000 downloads. So people are interested in, you know, intercultural things, and they are right, because, you know, these are actually what we're trying to do nowadays. We came up, I will not give you, again, too many details, but in order to do this kind of global work, we need to come up with a global definition, so we have to come up with a global definition of ethics in science and technology. So we did that by involving 3 key aspects of what we do, and that's also 3 key aspects that the global TA has. One is a dominant value society. You have to look at what values the society that you're working in basically has, but we also look at the public debate. We call it lay perceptions here of right and wrong, and also the policy-making system in these 3 countries. So basically, this is how we see that this process works. So in any global work, of course, you need to look at the values, but also you look at the institutional setting, whether it's on advisory structures, like in this case, professional ethics, or it's a public debates, in this case, lay ethics, as we call it. Both of them lead to policy making. So you have to find a system that you can take all 3 aspects on a common framework in all 3 societies in this case. So we did that by coming up with a discourse analysis framework. We look at 3 different debates that they are happened in all parts of society. They happen in policy, they happen in the NGO, the setting, and they happen also in the public, in the lay public. That's the innovation debate, the risk debate, and the power control, as we call it, debate. So this is basically the policy, the political debate around the issue. In our case, we had to look at the ethics in these debates and how these are embedded in these debates, whether it's a professional advisory or lay people's ethics, and all that was beyond that was, of course, the values that we had to look at. So I will end only with this one for the example, only to give you an overview that when you start looking at the values and when you start trying to have a global, let's say, framework of how you do things. So the first thing you look at the values. So what kind of science and technology values are we talking about? So we did an analysis of that. We look at the official strategy papers. We look at constitutional constitutions of countries as well, or in our case, at the Lisbon Treaty. We look at how science and technology is developed from the official point of view, the policy point of view, the political point of view, and what values are attached to it. So in Europe, and for those of you that come from Western countries, you will recognize these values immediately. So we have citizens' rights, which is very important for us, individual rights, we have individual freedoms, equality, solidarity, justice, dignity, and sustainability. In that, we recognize the values. We will not talk now about how these values are actually applied in the science and technology policy or these particular cases we had. But you see, let's forget now China for the moment, which is also kind of mysterious terms with harmony, progress, and peace and influence, but they do make a lot of sense actually if you translate them in our own way of understanding it. We look at India. We have the equity, inclusion, and access. So we saw that again and again. For India, science and technology is about access, is about frugal innovation as well. So that's an important value. So everything that happens in China, every political decision making must have these values into consideration as well. So these values are discussed as part of the science and technology developments in any case. For us, it's important to understand these values. So what do they mean for society in order to be able to provide the policy advice that we need to provide. I will not give you this one. We do current work on responsible research and innovation. We also work with other European countries and non-European countries. We try to understand how innovation is, the understanding of innovation in different countries. We focus on organizations. We look at the national discourse of innovation, but we also focus on research conducting and research funding organizations in what we do. We are a long list of groups, as you can see. We have here India, RIS. It's a current project that we do with RIS in responsible innovation. Actually, that's very much related to what I just told you now. It's part of our global outlook. This is also the funding organizations we have. These are kind of key organizations in many countries, like in our case, the Helmholtz or the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, the biggest also funder in the UK, and so on and so forth. So we have a big group that works actually in this area, and for us is a way to move our TA into the global aspect. So considering our network as it stands now, this is more or less the groupings, the countries that we work actively on trying to set up a global TA network, a global TA framework. But this is what we want to achieve. So we're also very interested in, I'm talking also with Russian colleagues, by the way, because Russia is also a very interesting country, with Iranian colleagues as well. Iran is a very interesting country when it comes to science technology developments, and so on and so forth. And finally, the parameters of a global approach. So what do we need to have in a global approach? Some last thoughts. If you want to have a global TA approach, if you have to have any kind of global collaboration approach, I would say, one is, the first parameter you need to have is desirability, so politics, science, diplomacy. We just said, you must want to have it. It must make sense for you to have it, politically speaking. You have to use your diplomatic, let's say, routes also to make that happen. But there is a necessity around it. Science is happening, collaborations are happening, developments will affect you whether you like it or not. So you must also be part of a global approach for that reason. And whatever you do, as I said before, and that's also what we continue working on, it's the values, the context, where the science and technology debate, where the policy is taking place, what kind of values do we have? How can we include that in a global approach, a common framework for everyone? In order to do that, we need standardization. So there are some efforts to standardize processes, but for us it's also important to standardize TA processes. So whether participatory, classical, or whatever one names them, one has to standardize this process that can be effective and also desirable in other countries, other settings. And that's what we are trying to do. And we don't go from nowhere there. There is experience around that. That's another, of course, important parameter. We do have in Europe the European Parliamentary TA Association, so we work actively for the last 20 years in Europe about that. We have experience about how one can do it in different cultures, even though they're all Western cultures in this way. But we also have new initiatives like the Technology Facilitation Mechanism and UN, so it's about technology transfer, and technology assessment is actually discussed as a way to set up the technology transfer mechanism. But as I said, anytime that I talk about this global approach, the most important parameter of all is goodwill. Without goodwill, you go nowhere. And once we have that, we'll find our way. As they say, the one who searches is the one who finds. So thank you very much. Questions, please. We need a microphone and someone to provide it, maybe, yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You mentioned Germany had decided to move away from nuclear power. How do you measure the correlation between the TA on nuclear power and the decision? Is there a correlation between what the TA is revealing and decisions made on that, or in fact are the decisions being made independent of what the TA assessment was? Yeah. And the second, just another question, I know you mentioned this in passing, why is it countries like the US decided to do away with the whole TA process?
Both good questions, and both have more or less the same answer, politics. So in Germany, it was a political decision, that's clear. In Germany, we have a chancellor that has a PhD in physics. She's a scientist, actually. She knows science very well. She's a quite technocratic person. And whether you like her policies or not, it doesn't matter. She's a scientist. She has a certain argumentation in the way that she speaks, and a certain low level of speaking that you can see the scientist in her. She doesn't usually make political decisions when it comes to science, but that was a political decision. Actually, to have such a huge change in the energy sourcing of the country, it can only be a political decision. It's not a risk decision. It's not a trade decision. It's not an economical decision. As a matter of fact, it's now only that people realize the consequence of this decision. So now we are asked to do a lot of TA, actually. It's not my area, energy, but I know it's relatively well from my colleagues. We asked to do a lot of TA because now we discover actually what the consequences of that decision were. One is that it's one thing to go sustainable, one thing to go, let's say, wind power, but nobody wants to have these wind turbines around them. They absolutely hate it, everyone, even the most green of the greens, if you like. They don't want to have them around. So there's no place to put it easily. Then, in order to do that, you need the new power lines that will go through the whole of the country, from north to south. Nobody wants to have power lines around their homes. There are localities that they are ready to demonstrate and go up. There are governments, local governments, that say, not in my backyard, basically. And it's going to be expensive. People haven't realized how expensive it is going to be because Germany is doing quite well, actually. Surplus is a record. People are well off. And even if they have to pay 10, 20% now more in their energy bill, it's okay. They can afford it. I won't say they won't notice it, but they can afford it. But if it hadn't been like that, then we would have also trouble there. So let's say that it was not a TA-based decision. But we have to accept it. And the same with the Office of Technology Assessment at the Congress. It was a political decision to close it down. There are many stories around it. As usually in the US politics, there is a lot of agendas, and someone comes with one book or another book about these agendas. It seems that there was also a kind of the usual dichotomy that we see in the US, Democrats versus Republicans. So it was Democrats who created the OTA and the Republicans that they abolished it. There was no scientific reason. It was just a supposedly a budgetary decision. They had to make some cuts. They said, okay, we cut the OTA.
Okay. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, for a developing country that want to carry out TA, is it right to just go into the field, all various areas, or you have to select some key components for pilot study? And which one will you suggest?
A key pilot on what? Sorry.
On technology assessment for the whole country.
Key pilots?
Yes, I'm talking about if you want to select specific areas for
technology.
For area of technology that we want to assess, or technologies we want to assess.
As I said, there's this reactive and proactive setting. Huh? So you do what the politicians tell you to do. You also do what you think it's interesting thing to do. I have to admit that in Germany, I don't see a big difference. I think people are quite aware, also politicians. Usually, those who are in the committee, for instance, they are well-educated people, and they are also interdisciplinary themselves. So they have a good knowledge of what is going on. So they do not ask for, uninteresting or unrelated topics. So energy is a big topic because, as we just discussed, it's a big thing that's happening nowadays in Germany, but not only in Germany. ICT, of course, a big topic. Anything from safety to data management to, international relations around ICT. That's a big issue as well. As we said, the algorithms is a big issue. Now the government also wants to have access to the algorithms, how the social media works. It's all the idea about the fake news. How do you control fake news? The only people that can control fake news is the people who own Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth. And we have the gene editing. I told you about that. These are also very, very, very important issue at the moment. So gene editing can happen now in a very particular way, and it can be done by almost anyone, if you like, with a CRISPR PR9 technology. These are also topics that are very much of interest to us. I could give you a list, actually, but I would say that our topics don't need to be your topics. Some of them are obvious for everyone, some of them are not. Energy might not be an issue, not at least in these terms, like we see it. Please.
Hi, I have a few specific questions. So you mentioned that you have a direct connection to Parliament in Germany, right?
Yes.
So who sets your agenda? Who identifies the actual problems that you're working on, all right? Number one. And I'm particularly interested in the risk assessment and threats area globally. Are there specific studies being done by all the TAs on, let's say, counterterrorism or intelligence sharing, etc.?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, in terms of the connection to the parliament and to the government, because there's also connection to the local government, local meaning the regional government. As I said, you know, we run the office, but there are a group of people who are there, the parliamentary office. And these people can only work for the parliament. So basically, we're kind of two offices, if you like, except that they are our colleagues. And these are people that we also exchange information and work with. So there is a one-to-one relationship. So there is a committee on technology assessment, which is, by the way, there is no committee now because there is no government in Germany. And once we will have a government, we will have also a committee on research and technology assessment. And this committee will meet once every 2 months, if I remember well, and they will talk with our colleagues in that office about the topics that they want to have a TA report about. So they are not allowed, our colleagues are not allowed to work in any other topic. Of course, they can tell them informally that they find this or that interesting, and this, you know, they can influence them, if you like, in this sense. But officially, it's on one way action. The other one, common TA projects on common issues. Well, that is why I want to go to a global TA, actually, because we don't know, or of course we know people that they do similar work here and there, but I also find out about groups in India, for instance, that they do similar work which I didn't know before, because we don't have such thing as a global TA platform yet. We have a European one. There we exchange information. There we know who does what. And there you can find out, usually, and there is a kind of overlap actually in our work, because as you can imagine, some issues like, I don't know, ICT, security, counterterrorism, and so on and so forth, these are of course common issues. So there will be common, not common, there will be reports done simultaneously, and there will be of course exchange of information. And we will also refer to one each other's reports. We don't all start at the same time, because we're not one institute, we're many institutes. And of course we get ideas from each other. If the Dutch start doing, they were the first ones who did synthetic biology, for instance. They made us aware, in a sense, that we also promoted synthetic biology discussion in Germany. And, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now it is clear that scientific knowledge and resource implementation becomes a political decision or a government decision, and it's often done based on interest. How do we then make it attractive, make it very necessary that government, both present and successive governments, will ensure that it is being implemented, it becomes part of the agenda, and if perhaps regularize it as part of the rules and regulations, so that successive government finds it difficult to either walk away from it or change it, so that we see how benefits it brings to countries and then continent, if I may say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there has been a lot of discussion. It comes also to the impact assessment that I was saying before, how to assess the impact, how you can increase your impact. There are different, let's say, theories, different also ways of approaching that. Some are more risky than others. You know, we tend in Germany to be low risk, let's say. For us, for instance, a parliamentary report is a parliamentary report. So it has to go to the parliamentary committee. It has to be agreed by the parliamentary committee. Then it becomes public. There is an embargo. No one can talk to the media or anyone else before that becomes public. Once it becomes public, you can talk. Actually, not our parliamentary people, but everyone else. Basically, they can talk about that. What happens to the reports? It's anyone's guess. It might move on, it might not move on. It is at least it's a parliamentary publication. They are obliged to discuss, basically, report because they ask for it. They ask for this assessment. Some of our colleagues, the more risky ones from, for example, the Netherlands, they were not happy with that system. But then that's also have a different culture. So what they would do, and actually had a strategy about doing that, it was to confront even the government. about the work that they were doing. They would go out in the public and they would say that we think that's wrong. That's a very high risk, actually, way of doing things. So they would initiate also debates, but they would also be a part of the debate. If they disagreed with the government, they will say it. We wouldn't, because that's not our role. For the Dutch, they think that's okay, but the Dutch then again have a very kind of blunt, if you like, very open type of policy discussion usually. So they can survive it, more or less. So there is not a straightforward answer about that. Really depends on where you are. So which country you come from, by the way? You said? Ghana. Okay. Yeah. If you came from Uganda, I would say if you have an Ugandan, someone from Uganda here, I would say, because I worked with the Ugandan parliament, trying in the past to set up a parliamentary office in Uganda. So I have some interesting stories about Uganda as well. Okay, so.
Yeah, my issue is almost related to his. I'm from Uganda.
Oh, you're Uganda, okay. So you will make me say the stories in public? No.
Yeah, my concern is I don't know how you do the stakeholder analysis of interest and influence, because in some instances you find that much as the politicians could agree in adoption of a certain technology, you would still find that the interests of the local people, the communities, are not represented. They are not at par with the decisions of the politicians. Now, in my view, aren't there ways, my concern is, aren't there ways of finding that much as you engage the politicians, you can also engage the people, because they're the ones to adopt, they're the ones to take on. The others are just they are just on top of them to guide them. But how can we also look at these local people? Aren't there ways you can bring them up to also maybe try to understand their concerns? Because really the politicians may not really understand the community on the ground. This is the instances where we find we set up technologies, or the government has proposed technologies like fertilizer, but people never at all adopt those technologies.
Yeah.
So how do we go about that?
Okay, I would say that depends again what type of debates you usually have, what kind of political system you have, and so on and so forth. So let me put it differently. It's not like, Germany has this innovation dialogue now, which is, involves basically everyone. We have some big dialogues with stakeholders, with the public, and it didn't come out of the goodwill of the government to listen to the little guy or whatever. It was okay because, we had a big discussion, we had a big conflicts. There were demonstrations in the past about different aspects, I don't know, biotechnology, genetic engineering, for example, was a big issue as well in Germany. People refused, they were up in arms, we don't want genetically modified food, and, the rest is history, as they say, between US and Europe. So one thing that makes the government listen to the people is the people. To start with. So that's one way to do it. So if they feel that the people would not accept it otherwise, if they would get trouble, everyone wants to have a decision with the least possible trouble. We are all very busy, would like to have the less possible discussion. I make this decision and that goes ahead and let me go to bed type of thing. But if you want really to include the people, you must have also a kind of a counter force making you do that. That's one thing. Let's say, on the other hand, that's if you are willing, because there is a kind of a local development, and even though your style is to make a decision, but nevertheless, the development depends on these people. Maybe then you want to get them into this process, of the assessment process, but then you want to get them for the wrong reasons, I would say. But still, wrong or right reasons, the process itself might create a kind of a social debate, that sometimes the social debate itself, goes beyond what you wish for, and has its own dynamic. And by the way, we have seen this type of dynamic in China a lot. Needless to say, the Chinese government also, they would like to do their job without a lot of problems. They don't like any other government social uprising in every aspect. But actually, the modified food technology debates in China was a bottom-up debate. People, like in Europe, maybe also because of Europe, if you like, because they could hear, they could see in the media what was happening there. They said, what's going on here, We don't want also to eat genetically modified food. So they also reached the point of embargo. They embargoed that for some time, and there is a big of a discussion in China. And other basically decisions that the Chinese government has made is really actually a reaction of the people. So you do need to have also active people. So, fight for the rights, as they say, in that sense. Technology assessment is not going to go out. Technology assessment is a process within a process. So only the Dutch, they feel like they can go out of the process and do something. And that's because in the Netherlands, they expect you almost to do that. They expect you to sit and express your opinion. Please. By the way, if someone is keeping the time, I don't know when we're supposed to finish this session. Huh? It's just another, okay, whatever. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Lisa, and I'm from New York University. I'm a student there. My question is, you keep mentioning setting offices, parliamentarian offices in other countries. How about the private sector? How involved are you with the private sector? What's the impact on the private sector? How much would you say you engaged with them in Europe? And my second question is about the standardization process in the European Union. Do you think that's necessary at this point? And why do you want to seek a standardized process?
Okay, let's start with standardization. Why I want to see it? Because I think if we don't standardize, we go nowhere. The truth is that it is also a kind of a value written decision, the standardization. Whenever we have any kind of meeting, like, I don't know, global ethics we had, or global responsible innovation, and so on and so forth, there will be always someone from one country or the other and say that, oh, come on, you cannot put everything in one bucket and have, a single thing. It doesn't work. We are different, just why can't you accept it? We're different and we do things differently. Yeah, okay, but where do we go from there? I would say, okay, if, you are different, the Indians are different, the Chinese are different, the Americans are different, the Brazilians, the Ugandans are different. Where do we go from there? So what's the point of having a common? But it seems that we're not so different. So it's a kind of, even if you like, a decision that you have to focus on the commonalities, not on the differences. You have to analyze the difference, but you have to focus on the commonalities. So when I talk about standardization, I don't really mean, this kind of E-type of things, although it would be nice if one day we come to that. I mean about the common understanding. So, reaching common definitions, for instance, about the things that we do. We didn't have in Europe a common definition of TA before we did that project. Why? Because people, they would keep on saying that, oh, come on, in Italy we do it like that. You Germans are, how it is in Europe. Well, we reach a point where we have a common definition, we have a common methodology. We still prefer one thing or the other, and people are still experimental, but we have reached that point. The whole European Union, actually, it's a standardization procedure, if you see it like that. Successful or not, my opinion is very successful. Some people say it's not, but yeah. The first one, industry. The industry, there's very little interaction with industry, but we also regret that. It's not about keeping a kind of objectivity around the work, so you don't want to have it. Industry is important, and there are good industries as well. There are bad industries and good industries, We shouldn't put them all into a single thing. We did actually a project called the Responsible Industry. So we look at the innovation process in industry through that perspective. We had, a hard time actually really working closely with industry. One is because they have their own processes, they have their own names, of course, obviously. There's also the secrecy around, their innovation process, so they cannot really easily go out. We're talking about transparency here. We're talking about stakeholder involvement. It's not so easy to do that in the innovation, industrial innovation process. But to their benefit, I would say, some industries are doing that. Actually, at the moment, I'm also working in a local project in Norway, where we work with, it's about assisted living. I don't know if you know this area. It's about old people. People who need actually assistance in their living conditions. So, the Norwegian local government is setting up a housing for these people, but it has to be, of course, specialized housing. And we, as TA experts, work, it's a kind of different type of TA, but we work also with the innovator. So work with a company who innovates, specializes in assisted living innovations, and the old people, and the local healthcare community, and the government of the Oslo region, well, for the benefit of all, I would say. But it is an open process, and it's really rare to happen. So not much industry, but I wish there would be a bit more. Please.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions more related to the international cooperation of your institution. First one, is there any kind of possibilities for making research in your institution?
Possibilities to do what?
Of making research for overseas researchers. I mean, can they come by DIADE program or, I don't know, Marie Curie program? And besides, you, if I'm not mistaken, haven't mentioned the cooperation within Horizon 2020 project. And do you have such kind of projects? If yes, are you interested in enlarging the mapping of this project? These two questions.
You want to work with us? In other words, you're welcome. To start with, yes, there are programs. It's also a big university. As I said, there are 25,000 students. There are all kinds of programs that some I know, some I don't know about. There are also specialized programs. So one could work in the institute via, if you're from overseas, for instance, to the DAAD, the German overseas, I can't translate it. Anyway, yes, whatever. They give scholarships, you know, for people to come over who had scholarships, who had people coming over to work with us, who have also specialized bilateral agreements with China, for instance. We have Chinese students from there. We have local scholarships. We have, well, I suppose all possibilities. It's not really something that I'm looking at in detail, but there are people who can help if one wants to do that. Horizon 2020, yeah, we have a lot of programs in Horizon 2020, actually. So you get online, you see there are really quite few programs there. And since, you know, we are a TA institute, we cover everything around science and technology. So it would be hard to find something. We don't do health technology assessment, by the way. You know, we don't do medical technology assessment. That's it's a different area. You know, but otherwise, you know, almost anything would be represented one way or the other. Some much more than others, but still. So I would say, if you have a specific interest, you let me know. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
So it's a great pleasure in thanking Professor Ladikas for this excellent presentation and so patiently and passionately answering all questions. And I also thank all of you who have asked such thought-provoking questions in this session. The plan is we break for a short while now. At 3, we gather again for our next session, which is on SDGs. For the ITEC group, in your agenda, you would find a mention of a group photograph session, but we have postponed it by 2 days because some of your colleagues would only arrive on Thursday. So we break for a while and come back for the session on SDGs. Thank you so much.